This is Michael Krasny welcoming you to another episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, and we're going to talk to what many people regard as the best mystery writer in the world, maybe even the best thriller writer in the world, the best police writer in the world. Michael Connelly's with us. He's sold probably well over 50 million novels. You can't keep track of how many novels he's sold, and he's won nearly every major mystery writer award, and he is someone who I'm always delighted to be in conversation with. This is his 39th novel. It's his 40th book that we're going to talk about a bit and also talk about his work and his life. And I want this to be a kind of far-reaching interview, the kind I like to do that I call deep dives. It's another Ballard and Bosch novel. That may not mean anything to those of you unfamiliar with Michael Connelly. And if you are unfamiliar, get familiar. If you like these kind of novels, he's a must. And we'll talk about the novel, and then we'll talk about many other things. Michael, always good to be in conversation with you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
This is called a Ballard and Bosch novel, as I said, and Hieronymus Bosch, many people know from Netflix, and many people are being introduced more to Renée Ballard now. How do you decide? You've got so many characters, main characters. Mickey Haller, of course, in the lawyer novels that you've written, the Lincoln lawyer novels that have been made into motion pictures. How do you decide who it's going to be in the next novel?
It's kind of an instinctive thing. I do have all these characters, 4 or 5 of them, and they all kind of move, I consider, on the same kind of plane or on the same canvas. So I really feel I can always grab anyone and run them through a book. But you do have to pick the first one. I mean, the protagonist, the main, the center of the wheel, if you will. And, sometimes I come up with a story idea and I think who's best for that. There's a big difference between writing about a detective and a criminal defense lawyer. So, and I spend time with people that do both those jobs, and, I'll hear a story that inspires me and I'll know that's the direction I want to go. But it just seems to be something that comes natural, then instinctive, like, oh, this is going to be good for Ballard, or this is going to be good for the Lincoln lawyer.
Well, as Grace Paley said about her protagonists, they all work for you. What's the genesis of The Waiting? What started that in your mind?
The Waiting came from a couple different things. One is access. I'm haven't been a working or card-carrying journalist in 30 years or so, but I still feel like I'm a journalist, and so I pursue access. I think I've gotten this reputation among police departments, or police detectives, I should say, that I'm trying to get their world right, so they're more open to me. So I have an in with a woman who runs the cold case, or I should say ran the cold case unit for the LAPD for a number of years till she just retired a couple months ago. And her name's Mitzi Roberts, and she's the inspiration for the character Renée Ballard. And so when you have someone who's running a cold case and has that kind of access and is willing to answer your questions and your texts and your emails and even read some of your pages, you use it, So I knew she was heading towards retirement, so I wanted to do a Renée Ballard story, but I didn't have the story. I just knew I wanted to write about Renée. And then something very luckily dropped into my lap about 35 years ago, when I was a crime beat reporter in South Florida. I wrote about this serial rapist known as the pillowcase rapist, because he would take a pillowcase, he would wake women up, he would sneak into break in their homes, attack them while they were sleeping, and put a pillowcase over their head. Awful stuff. And the guy committed something like 40 assaults in a short space of time, like 2 years. And was never caught. And I wrote about this extensively, about the hysteria, about people buying guns, people shooting animals by mistake, all kinds of stuff that happen when a community is beset by this kind of fear. But it was like an unrequited story for me. I was in South Florida working for my hometown paper. I got hired by the LA Times. I moved 3,000 miles away, and that story was never solved, and that was it. And then jumped to about 3 years ago, And this young man gets arrested on a felony, which in Florida requires that you give a DNA swab. So his DNA went into the system, and it came back that his father was the long sought after pillowcase rapist. And so 30 some years after the scourge that I wrote about, this case was solved, and the guy went to prison last year, was sentenced to prison last year. And that really, so I said, I want to write about that, and I'll give that to Ballard. I'll move the case to Los Angeles. I'll make it way more complicated than that, which I think I did. And that became the center line through the story. But, the other thing I like to do is try to be as realistic as possible, and no detective works one case at a time. So I added a few other cases as well.
You've always got the subplots, and I think you must have a map to keep them straight, because sometimes for a reader, it's not only challenging, but it's exciting because you have suspense operating on a number of different levels, and you're able to sustain that and keep the reader just being fed with the suspense. In fact, it begins with Renée surfing. I don't want to give too much away here, but do you surf, by the way?
I haven't surfed. Well, I did about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago was the last time I surfed, when I was trying to teach my daughter.
I don't want to give too much away here, but she gets ripped off. Her car gets robbed, and it includes her badge. And I just want to tell you something, interested to get your response, because I was looking at some responses. The novel had just come out, and somebody wrote, who was a big fan of yours and had effusive things to say. But he said, how could Renée Ballard be so stupid to think that she had to kind of hide the fact that her badge was stolen? I thought, how could this guy think she's stupid? I mean, this is something that, especially a woman who's running an operation of cold cases and is dependent on her superiors, might feel, not even with that much paranoia, would be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I haven't read that comment, so I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at, whether he thinks physically the badge would be noticed missing.
Badges get taken and lost all the time, so it wouldn't be any big.
Well, no, I mean, here's a point there, and I did work this out with Mitzi Roberts, the real detective, that if your badge is stolen, it's an embarrassment, and you might get a ding in your personnel file, but you just acknowledge it and they get you a new one. But I write fiction, and I have extenuating circumstances. There's people in the department that are out to get Renée, and she doesn't want to give them the ammunition to get her. So she wanted to keep this quiet.
Plus, you wanted her to hunt the guy down, right?
Yeah, I mean, and also she's a resourceful person, and she felt like, maybe I can get this back myself. And this is like, we're talking about first chapter stuff, so we're not giving a lot away here, but that's the inciting moment of the book, that she comes in from surfing and her stuff is gone.
I don't want to give too much away, but there is a case that you bring back from, shall we say, many, many years ago, that is a very famous case that many people know through reading crime fiction or seeing movies and so forth. And there's a very funny line, because they say something about the most famous case in LA, and somebody says, oh, OJ, had a laugh out of me. But there is a reality here that you're dealing with again, and you deal so much with current events and with things that are happening. I mean, it's a big part of the tapestry of your novels, all of your novels.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the journalist in me. I write fiction. These characters don't really exist, but I really want them to be planted in a real world. And so you do reflect on what's going on, big and small, in society. I've been very fortunate that I've written for 30-some years about Los Angeles, and so it occurred to me that, why have I not ever mentioned the most notoriously unsolved case, the Black Dahlia case?
Oh, I didn't want to mention it.
It's out there. People have been talking about it and so forth. And, I mean, that doesn't give a lot away. It basically
doesn't give much away. Yeah.
Renée is the keeper of that case, as the head of the cold case unit, as was the real detective, Mitzi Roberts. And again, it comes back to access. I've talked to her at length about that case. It's a 1947 murder where the woman was cut in half, and it's L.A. folklore. It's transcended from true crime to folklore. There's been other books, other movies, novels, documentaries, true crime books. It's very much a written about case, because it's so horrible and because it's unsolved, and a lot of weird stuff happens, a lot of crazy crimes happen in Los Angeles. But in 1947, this thing was way beyond the pale of what people could imagine someone would do. And so I kind of sat back and said, well, I've written 39 novels or 38 at this point about this city, and I once really acknowledged this crime. So am I reflecting the real LA, or is my LA totally fiction? So I just thought I would write about it, and we don't have to say anything else more about it,
I'm going to ask you about just a little bit off the track here for a moment, because you've made LA come alive in your novels. I mean, sometimes it's like reading somebody who knows your GPS backward and forward. And, you've brought Southern Florida alive for your readers too, in so many ways, which you know intimately as well. Any kind of generalizations? I just did a podcast with Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about South Florida being much more rampant with fraud, with doctors who moved there from other cities where they didn't commit fraud. And he's trying to work out sort of a meme or an epidemic about Florida, or say something about Florida. And he also writes about all the bank robberies that occurred in LA, which was also an epidemic that didn't occur in any other cities. You think about how unique South Florida is, and how especially Lauderdale, Miami, and LA. How do those two contrast in your mind?
I think there's more in common than contrasting. I mean, I think both places are destination places, the cities or areas. People move there from somewhere else because they're looking for something, or wherever they're from is not working. And not everyone gets what they're looking for. I mean, I think it's more open in Los Angeles with the entertainment industry and the whole, going back to Black Dahlia, people coming there to try to make it because they didn't make it wherever they're from. I have to say I'm one of them, even though I came from South Florida, and where I never went wanting as a crime reporter because of all the strange stuff that was going on there in the 80s. But I tried writing novels there twice. I made 2 attempts, and they were not worth even having my mother read, let alone an agent or a publisher. But they were learning experiences. So I moved to LA to shake up my life. So I'm just like everyone else who comes to LA. I went there because where I'm from, it wasn't working. I wasn't clicking. And it took that move for me to finally get a book published.
Let's move back to Florida because family's there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a home. I did till the storm took it away a couple weeks ago. I have a home on the west coast of Florida where my wife is from. But I've been pretty much living in LA since the late 80s.
And I'm just also curious about what you feel about your journalistic career. Do you miss it sometimes? I wish you were back on the crime beat, that kind of thing?
Yes and no. I went many years or decades actually without missing it because whatever I got out of being a crime reporter, I was getting into my novels. Again, they're fiction, but I spend time with the people that do these kind of jobs. I hear their stories and they end up in my book. So in some way, the bureaucracy, the politics of the police department in LA, I think is accurate reporting in my books. So that was fine for me. But something about the last 5, 6 years, or longer actually, and now going back 8 years, this whole advent of fake news really bothered me. Maybe because I was still a journalist at heart. And that's what made me kind of go back towards journalism in the form of podcasting and documentary making. So I'm telling more true stories now than I have in decades.
But you've also been an executive producer on TV shows and play. How does that stack up in your mind in terms of things you like to do or want to do?
It has the appearance that it's all-consuming or at least consuming, but it doesn't take a lot of my time. Because I'm the originator, I write the books that these shows are based on. I get a executive producer credit. I dip in and out of the writing rooms when I'm asked, or sometimes I just want to go. In the early years of the Bosch show, I wrote scripts, but I've really kind of laid off of that and really concentrated on being a book writer. And so it looks like I'm Mr. Busy, but I'm not. I still have maintained writing at least one book a year all through all these TV years and all that. So I can keep my schedule.
It's also interested in Renée Ballard coming back in this book as a central figure, but so does Maddie Bosch, Bosch's daughter, Hieronymus Harry Bosch's daughter. And it seems like you become more aware of wanting women characters. Is that sort of a good generalization to make? Or certainly in women's issues as well. I mean, you got the mother-daughter thing in this, and mother abandoning the daughter and daughter searching for the mother and all that.
A lot of it has to do, again, goes back to that access. So, I had access to the woman running the cold case squad in real life. So why would I jump and make it a man running it? I just, I have this person who's going to tell me what it's like to be in, a misogynistic bureaucracy, a men's club, and how she's made her way. And to me, that you're trying to build your characters on all levels as being heroic in some way. And so I knew if she didn't mind that I take a lot of her life and put it into my fiction, I have already the baseline of a heroine that I think people will be attracted to and attached to. So it's not like I'm sitting there going like, I need more women in my books or anything like that. It's just the way it works out. Maddie Bosch was inspired by my own daughter. They're the same age. And so when she first showed up in a book many, many years ago, it was because I had a live living research subject in my house who was saying the same things to me that Maddie ends up saying to her father. So it's really about what I can reach, not any kind of greater thinking of like, I want to populate my books with strong women. These are things that came to me, and I realized their value, I think, and pursued them. The other aspect of this is I've always had my characters age in real time, and so I've known for at least the last decade that Harry is aging out. And when I say aging out, I mean in terms of being believable, that he can do what he's doing. And so I've looked for the heir apparents, and because Maddie Bosch was a little too young, I invented a Renée Ballard. But now Maddie's coming along, and so very consciously in this book, I wanted to find a role where she can have a significant part in the book and actually show the reader how she is Harry Bosch's daughter, and she's going to be a good detective the way he is. And whether I get to live long enough to carry that forward or not, I don't know. But this book is to me, in my mind, was the starting of the passing of the baton.
Well, let's hope you do live a long and healthy life and produce many more novels, because you've given a lot to us. And yet, Harry's got cancer now, and every once in a while you have to kill off a character. I think about Earl Briggs, Mickey Haller's driver.
Yeah.
I don't want to give this away by any, but somebody dies and is killed off in your new novel. You get identified strongly with these characters. You feel that sense of, almost emotional connections.
A little bit. You feel a duty to some of them. And like Harry Bosch, my entire life as a novelist is, runs through him. I mean, I have these other characters, but no one I've written for as long as Harry Bosch. And so I was first writing the character would become Harry Bosch in the late 80s. And so there's definitely a connection to him, and it's something that I consider. You mentioned he has health challenges. He's 74 years old. I said in the books he was born in 1950. So I know there's a reality there, but at the same time, killing someone like I kill in this book is not the same as the question of what should I do with Harry Bosch. I mean, so I guess this is my long way of saying that. Yeah, God, somehow we got on this mortality thing of me. Whenever I'm writing my last book, I hope Harry Bosch is in it. So let's just put it that way. So I don't have plans to knock him off or anything like that. But sometimes ancillary characters, have to go for either plotting reasons or to shake things up. I think it was Dickens who said that if you ever get stuck in a book, set somebody on fire. And so it's a kind of a form of that, that how you can use something like that to really wake up the reader and do something to your main characters that gets them very emotional or whatever, charged, whatever they want to do, whatever you need them to do. There's nothing like some kind of painful thing like that happening to get it done.
Funny you mentioned Dickens, because I've always thought of you as a literary writer, and really, I don't know if you accept that category or not. It's honorific, and I mean it in that spirit. And I found myself wondering. I mean, you always mention Chandler, and he's clearly the seminal influence in your work. But you also mentioned Thomas Harris, a few others. I wonder about more literary sources. I wonder, for example, I know you went to Thomas Aquinas High School, and I think there must be some Irish Catholic influences there. But you have that Hieronymus Bosch. You still have that painting of hell over your desk.
It's not over my desk. I moved it into a restroom, but it's there. I actually put in there's actually one kind of happy or light panel that Hieronymus Bosch painted, which shows a lighted tunnel and angels leading people towards heaven. And I actually have that in my writing room now. So something changed along the way to brighten my way.
Have you read Joyce, Yeats?
Yeah, I read everywhere, I think. And I think, first of all, thanks for saying I'm a literary writer, or I'm close to it, or whatever you said. I appreciate that. I'm pretty well read, but I have just always gravitated towards these stories where the stakes are higher, and I have to admit, you have an easy frame of a crime to use as the lens on whatever you want to write about, and I like that. Also, a very literary crime writer to me is Richard Price, and I read an interview of him early on that has stuck with me, and I think he was getting baited. I think it was in a New York or something, and it was like, why does a guy with your literary talents write crime novels? And he said, because if you circle around a murder long enough, you get to know a city. And that's really what I'm doing. I'm trying to use Harry Bosch to explore a city. And I think Richard Price was right about that. Luckily, I've been able to tell him I agree with that, and I appreciate that. I used to have that line taped on the bottom of my computer back when I had a sitting computer. Now I use a laptop, but I think he really nailed something there, and that's what I follow.
He's also a terrific writer who I admire and have loved interviewing. You also mentioned Harper Lee, and she was clearly a major influence when you were young, but your mother got you interested in crime fiction?
Yeah, in a way, she really loved, she was always reading. She's a voracious reader, as opposed to my father, who didn't read at all, and I had no memory.
Construction worker?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was more of a boss guy, but, and he designed the places that he built, but, I never saw him with a book, and where I almost never saw my mom without a book. She was the type that just always had a paperback novel in her purse. And it was mostly, softer crime, P.D. James type stuff. And I read that, and then I just kind of gravitated towards more hard-boiled stuff as I went on.
Didn't you, in fact, rent an apartment that Chandler lived in?
That's kind of a Wikipedia misnomer. So what it is I discovered Chandler through the 1973 Robert Altman movie, The Long Goodbye. I never read Chandler. I was reading a lot of crime fiction, but I really like contemporary stuff, and Chandler was 20 years old. His most recent book was 20 years old, so I probably would have skipped it if I knew about it. But that movie was a contemporary take on a 20-year-old novel. And I bought the novel, loved the novel, then read all of Chandler's stuff, and that was part of the process of me deciding to become a writer. But when I got to L.A. many years later as a reporter, I used my reporting skills because there was no internet then, and I had a Thomas Brothers map, and I I found this very cool apartment that Marlowe, the detective, used in the movie. So it wasn't Raymond Chandler ever lived there, but it was a movie home for the detective, and it had a nice little view of Hollywood. And I found him. I was a reporter, and I went and knocked on the guy's door, the manager's door, and said, "Is that apartment for rent?" And he said, "No." But I gave him my LA Times business card. I said, "If it ever comes open, call me and I'll rent it." And he called something like 10 years later. He still had the card. I was no longer at the LA Times when my phone rang on the desk of someone I knew there, who I used to work with. And she said, "Well, he hasn't worked here in years, but I can get a message to him." And I got the message, and I rented the place. And by then I had a home, and I didn't need the space to live in. I rented it to write in. And so I had that for about 5 years, and thought like the ghost of Raymond Chandler or Robert Altman or somebody would help me write. It didn't work, but it was a cool place, and there was a nonstop procession of knocks on the door from would-be writers and established writers who wanted to see the place, who had been affected by that same movie. That was pretty heartfelt. That was really neat.
So were you inhabited by any of those spectral figures or ectoplasm? Or
I don't know. I don't think it worked out the way I'd hoped.
well, you mentioned Wikipedia. You read any biography of Michael Connelly, and one of the first things that's mentioned is that you won an Edgar Award with your first novel, which is considerable honor. And I wonder what the effect was on you. I mean, that's a big deal to win an Edgar Award, with the first novel, isn't it? It was for you, I'm sure.
Well, you only get one shot at it. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm by no means an overnight success, but that certainly helped. Top of that, I went to the banquet, and the person who gave it to me was Elmore Leonard, one of my heroes. So I got to meet Elmore Leonard. So my critical acclaim because of that was far ahead of any commercial success, but it really helps when you can say Edgar Award winner on the cover of your book. So I think it no doubt helped, and I think it probably gave my publisher a little more patience to see if I could build an audience.
Did it give you more confidence?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. And like I said, I wrote 2 books that, no one's ever read, but the second one was better than the first. So I had hope. And the third one became the one that won this Edgar. So it all kind of adds up to me feeling like I'm on the right track.
And you have been on that track ever since, and a very productive track. In fact, it's often a track filled with darkness, though. I mean, I feel in your novels the empathy, I think, that you want your readers to feel, particularly with these cases that go cold in that library of lost souls and cases that are never solved. In fact, this title, by the way, is from the new novel is from Tom Petty, isn't it?
Yeah, The Waiting.
Yeah, I want to come back to the darkness, but can we pause there for a moment? Because you're inspired listening to jazz. I mean, you said that many times. And your musical taste, people take very seriously and jot things down, and you're giving all kinds of hints of maybe records that people who aren't aficionados like you or Clint Eastwood aren't that familiar with. But there is a sense of you're being inspired by and kind of keeping a cadence with the jazz.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for a character to have jazz, and so that's very much Harry Bosch's world, and I think it's a character stroke. That sounds like less than it is. I think it's a big character stroke what someone listens to and what they get out of it. And I also think that jazz is not for everybody. It's it probably sells the least amount of records and so forth. And I just thought that would be right for Harry. It's weird. Music is hard to describe in words. It's the hardest thing I do. I can write a crime scene. I can write an autopsy, all that. The hardest thing, I can write a legal scene in a courtroom. I really hesitate when I'm writing about music because it's just so hard. It's the biggest challenge that I have, but I know it's important. So I really try to get something about the resonance that Harry Bosch feels when the redeeming stuff he feels from music. I think it's really important as part of his character. And then I often chastise myself because I don't do it with my other characters as much or as well. Even, I would give them different music. I think, Ballard is more contemporary music. And, the waiting, there's references to, I like my titles of books that mean different things at different times. Waiting for a wave is the first meaning in this because we open with her on the water. But waiting for justice is a big thing. It's thematic in a lot of my books. And, Tom Petty did have that song. I could tell you a story about that. I actually had many of the lines from the song in the book until I found out what the music company was going to charge me to use it. So they got cut back a little bit.
Is it more challenging to write sex scenes than violent scenes, or vice versa?
I think it'd probably be more to write sex scenes, and that's probably why you don't see very many of them in my books. In fact, I just finished a book earlier this week that will come out next year. And it's a new character, and I wanted this person to be more adjusted than my characters. And maybe you just mentioned how my books are kind of dark. I wanted this guy, he's a detective, but I wanted him to come home to somebody, which is rare in my books. If you notice, all my characters usually come home to an empty house. And, but I wanted him to come home to somebody, and that's a big change for me, It only took me 39 books to get here. And I found that as almost as difficult as writing about music is to write about sex. There's something, maybe it's because I'm a Catholic guy, as you said, from St. Thomas Aquinas. It's just, almost embarrassing for me to write about it.
I know you know the name Walter Tevis. He wrote The Hustler and The Color of Money, and it was a mentor of mine who said, it can only be described in certain ways, and then you're limited, as you can't go into different directions with it. Whereas with violence, it's a whole different story. That's why I was curious to find out your thoughts on that as a writer. Also curious to find out your thoughts about so many things. And I wanted to ask you about the darkness. Does it infect you? Do you have to keep kind of at bay and away from you?
I think I'm already away from it. I do write about dark stuff, but there's usually light in the books, the light being this resilient and relentless person who's trying to make sense of something that happened, whether that's Renee or Harry or whatever. So they're the ones who kind of pull me through this stuff. But, I'm the first to admit, a lot of this comes out of my head, or I've heard stories. I'm much removed from that stuff, that real detectives and real cops see as a daily part of their life almost. And, but it is the source of my fascination as a writer. I think not me going to darkness, but I write about people who go into darkness, and it's inspired by real people who go into darkness. And that's a tough life. And you have to, and that, and I said this in the books, to me, it's a law of physics. You go into darkness, darkness is going to go into you. It's the Nietzsche thing about, when you look into the abyss looks into you. That happens. I've known several cops who have committed suicide. It's a tough job, and you got to find a way of stopping it from metastasizing inside you. And like with Harry, it might be the music, or it might be him looking out at the city from his backyard perch, or with Ballard, it's being on the water. The ocean, cures her. And you got to have that, I think. And as my life as a non-journalist journalist, that's what I ask a lot about when I spend time with the people that inspire my stuff.
You do so much research, though. And it must be very different writing a Mickey Heller novel with all the legal stuff that you get into than doing all the police procedures and all of the forensics and things. Well, you get into that with Mickey Heller, too, but that you find in a Bosch novel. And why'd you decide to make them half-brothers?
It's that moving plane I was talking about, or the canvas, the mosaic. I wanted everything to be linked. And when I was writing the Lincoln Lawyer, the novel called Lincoln Lawyer, I was known as this guy who wrote detective novels. So this to me started out as a one-off. I'd write this one book about a guy on the flip side of the coin. And I was about halfway through. No, I was actually through one draft. I usually do about 3 drafts, one draft and then 2 write-throughs. And on my write-through, I realized this is not going to be a one-off. I really like this character. I think it's interesting, and I think he can go the distance in other books. So then I said, well, then I'm going to connect him somehow to this whole mosaic I got going here. And, I remembered 10 or 12 years earlier in my second book where I just do this one 3-page scene where Harry Bosch recalls the one time he met his father, who was a pretty famous criminal defense attorney named Mickey Haller, and that he met him one time, knocked on his door in Beverly Hills, and a little kid answered the door, and he said, "Can I talk to your father?" So that was his half brother. So that Mickey Haller Jr. was in a book I had written 10 or 12 years earlier, and I just went back and grabbed that name. It wasn't like 10 or 12 years later I had this master plan. It was just like a way of finding a way to connect the stories.
So where did the Lincoln come from?
The alliteration. I met a guy who worked out of his car. That was the main inspiration for that character. I met a criminal defense attorney, and in our conversation, I asked where his office was. He said, "I work out of my car." And he said, "Not because I'm not a good lawyer. I'm actually pretty successful. I live in Malibu. And but this is the best way to do it in this city of 400 miles of freeway and 40 different courthouses. This is how you do it." And that inspired that story.
I said before that there's so much that you make your readers aware of by just keeping current. I wanted to ask you about ears. I'm not giving anything away here, but suddenly I discovered in reading this newest novel of yours that the visual of the exterior of an ear is just as accurate as fingerprints in terms of identifying people individually who may be responsible for crimes. When did this come about?
It really came out about, or I should say how I found out about it. After 9/11, some of our Homeland Security forces would set up facial recognition posts in airports and things like that. And they were finding that the best way to match someone moving across a camera screen with someone who's wanted was matching their ears. And that has led to a slowly rising use of ear identification technology. And what I love about that is, like everything, when I was one of my last stories I wrote as a journalist for the LA Times was about the first DNA case. The first time DNA would be used in a criminal case in California, and all the effort that went into making sure we win this case and that it is bulletproof as it goes through the appeals process. And that's how you establish something as usable evidence. And that's what's going on with this ear technology. They're waiting for a case where it actually goes into court and is used in convicting someone of a crime, and then withstands all the appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court. So once they have that, you'll probably be hearing more and more about it.
I also thought I knew a lot about psychoanalysis, and then I discovered vicarious trauma. You discovered that in your readings, or?
I actually discovered that through my daughter, who's getting a master's in psychology. And she's asked me to read her theses and her theme papers and so forth. And I had never heard of vicarious trauma either. And it was something that is diagnosed with first responders quite a bit. And so, yeah, that had to go into the book.
It's really, a constant source of illumination to read any of your novels, just like this one is exemplary in I remember reading about the incels in the previous novel. I didn't know that word was used and what it designated. The sovereigns in this novel. You have these things, again, that you take pretty much out of current events.
Yeah. I want to reflect. The books are published. They're set in the year they're published. So they're very contemporary. I usually am writing them for about 10 months, and then about 5 months later they're published. And so it's like it's a very contemporary way of reflecting what's going on in society. But yeah, it's classified as fiction. It's made up. But you can really say a lot about what's going on, about trends in law enforcement, trends in society, trends in, social media, how things are changing. That's part of the fun. And I think, deep down, that's where you can give a mystery higher resonance. If it is reflecting something that people should be paying attention to or already are paying attention to and know it's important.
So you really kept up with technology. I mean, it comes across in your work. Do you make it a habit of being apprised of what's current and being sure that you are?
Yeah, I like to hear it. I have, for a long time, I've had what I call an internet researcher. So when I like to always be writing. And so if I'm coming across, like I had heard about this ear identification technology, and I would shoot him an email saying, find out everything you can on this. Find me cases. If there have been any cases, tell me how it works. And then I get a package from him that has everything, and then I can, go through it and take what I need and figure out how I can use it in a story and so forth. But, my thing is to always be writing and wait for the kind of stuff to come in. And so that person, it's not like every day I'm sending him something to do. So he's out there floating around in the internet looking for new odd technology stuff that maybe people haven't heard of, because I know the value of that. I mean, I'm very proud that you're impressed by this. So that proves the case. I know that if someone has not heard of this ear technology and they read this book, they're going to go like, huh, and they're going to be, I think that helps them enjoy the book. And so I'm very much aware of that. And I'm also just fascinated by this kind of stuff. It's, I've been given this amazing situation. My first book came out 32 years ago, and I'm still writing about that guy. What a gift someone's given me. The guys have given me. And, so I don't want to waste it. I want it to be reflective of that 32-year passage of time in a city, in a society, in technology. So why not, explore these things that are new and changing the world.
But you're educating your reader, too. About DNA detection and all of that.
If they trust you, it's fiction. So some readers might think, well, that's made up. But very little in my book, technology-wise or procedure-wise or even bureaucracy-wise, I think is made up. I think it's I'm using what's really there and finding ways of using it for story.
In fact, there's something that you do that I think is fascinating. There are so many acronyms in the world of police work and so forth, and you've got them all in your books, but it's always described for the reader what that acronym stands for. If it's not in the next sentence, it's following and somebody's mentioning what the acronym stands for.
Yeah, I think I have that habit of dropping it in when you don't know what it means, and then it will come out. Usually within at least a couple pages, but that's the thing I've gone back and forth with many times with my editors who want to have it explained first. But if it's in dialogue, no one would say it that way, that kind of thing. I think she's realized that this is the way I'm going to do it, so she doesn't have to raise the flags anymore.
You're still a journalist at heart, and I think, the great American novelists, a lot of them, most of them, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Dreiser, started out as journalists. And then they found out they had this creative ability that they could put into fiction, and they morphed.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think not only did my journalism card, get me into police stations, but just the writing and the work ethic I've really benefited by. But, in my day, at least in newspapers, now stuff is put on the newspapers online, and I guess you can write as long as you want. But in my day, there was no internet, and you were always given, especially a crime reporter, it always gets the short shrift of the newspaper, you always wrote to you wrote to a hole, and your hole was either 6 inches or 10 inches or 20 inches, whatever. You knew when you wrote a story, it has to be this length and not longer. So you really learn to hone your words and your sentences and your dialogue to every sentence carrying pieces of information. There's no fluff, no one says, "Oh, wow," quote unquote. They say, "I saw him do it." You just can't waste space, and you can't waste words. And I think I carried that over, even though now I can write as long as I want and my books are 100,000 words. I still kind of maintain that honing things down.
So style is not as important to you as it is to so many writers? It's more telling the story?
Well, I think story is first, but I think there is a style in this supposed lack of style, I mean, it's just the less is more style.
But you don't want to be ornate. You've said that.
No, I think short sentences linked together, in a paragraph. Short sentences create momentum, and probably more so in a crime novel than a literary novel. You need movement. You need to keep your reader moving, riding with you. And that process is very reflective of the writing process. I think, if I can feel if I have momentum, the reader's going to have that momentum. If I'm really struggling, if it's a tough day of writing, it's going to be a tough day of reading, or, that page is going to be hard to read. And so you circle back when you're having a better day and rewrite. But yeah, I think the crime fiction really lends itself to a need for speed.
So how many days do you write? Do you write 7 days a week, 6, 5? And how many hours a day?
It's always different. I mean, I like to start in the morning very early. I like to start in darkness,
so to speak.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, metaphor. Get up very early and write till I feel like I've moved the story forward. And that can be anything. That can be a whole chapter, but it could be just a really good conversation between two characters. It could be a really key piece of information that is delivered to the reader, but hidden, and it will only bloom like a flower later on in the book. That kind of stuff. So I never say like, I got to write 2,000 words a day. I have to write X number of hours. I do try to write every day, but sometimes it's very, very limited. I had a flight today that was like about an hour and 15 minutes. So I wrote for about a half hour on the plane, and that will probably be all I do today. But I did write every day, and it keeps the story circulating in your head. And that's the important thing. Did you ever interview Harry Cruz? He was my teacher in college, and he was the guy that he said to me, he said to the class, if you're going to be a writer, you got to write every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes. And the point of that is you won't lose the story. It will always be churning. And I found that to be true.
Yeah, I think as someone who has the strange distinction of maybe interviewing more writers than anybody, living or dead, that's always the advice: write every day. I mean, that's so many writers say. Any other dollops of wisdom that you would give aspiring writers, or that you give them?
They're only things I'd steal from other people, but I think the other key piece was something he didn't tell me or in the class, but something Kurt Vonnegut was asked that question. Maybe it was by you, I don't know. But he said, make sure on every page everybody wants something, even if it's only a glass of water. I think that's the key to character development. And I actually do that. Eventually I write online, on a computer, and then I rewrite on the computer. And then usually my last go through, I print out and have a physical manuscript. And I look at the pages and make sure Harry Bosch or Mickey Hall wants something on every page, because how your characters go about getting something big and small from a glass of water, or Harry Bosch wanting to have a cigarette, to wanting to solve a murder, really defines the character. And that's what the reading experience is about, latching onto a character and writing with them.
Do they surprise you, though, your characters? Do they do things that cast real shadows and you hadn't expected?
That's always a difficult question for me, because, nothing happens that you don't write. But, I've been able to write about characters over many years, many books, and So a lot of them end up in spaces that I didn't see coming, or, things happening that, when I wrote the first Harry Bosch book, I didn't know he would be where he is now. I didn't know I had never thought he would have a kid, that kind of thing. So I guess there's some surprises, but for the most part, you're the guy pulling all the strings. So it's hard to surprise yourself.
Well, I know and hope that many Michael Connelly aficionados will hear this interview, and there's a question that probably some of them may want an answer to, and that is there a favorite of your 39? Is there one of these? I mean, I know they're all your children, but is there one that you covet more or feel more attached to?
Well, there's a couple that I like for certain reasons. I wouldn't pick my best one. Hopefully I'm getting better at it. So one of my more recent books would be my best effort. But, my fourth novel was called The Last Coyote. And that was when I transitioned from being a full-time journalist, part-time novelist to full-time novelist. And the year I wrote that was really revelatory to me, and I also saw a big advance in the quality of my writing because it had my full focus. I wasn't going to the newspaper and writing several crime stories and then coming home and trying to write a novel. Just the full attention. That's when I realized maybe I could do this for the rest of my life, and that if I kept my attention, I can write something pretty good. So that's probably my favorite book, and that might just be nostalgic. Hopefully it's not my best book because I've written 35 since then, but it is, I would have to pick that.
Would you pick one for a do-over or maybe semi-do-over if you had a chance?
There's probably a lot of that. I mean, it's funny, I don't like going back and reading my books, but when I got in the last 10 years of having shows made based on them, I had to go back and refresh myself so I could know what I'm talking about in the writing room. And so you see stuff like, wow, I wrote that, that's pretty good. And then there's stuff I wish I hadn't written that, so it's hard to say like a whole book I would rewrite. I wrote a book called The Overlook, which started as a serialized story in the New York Times Sunday magazine. And then I expanded it. And when I look at that book, still my shortest novel, I wish I expanded it more. Because I really only expanded it plot-wise, and I should have expanded it character-wise more than I did. So that would probably be the one I'd say.
You got something else in the works now?
Well, I just finished the book. I'm just turned it in, so I'll be getting notes from my editor pretty soon. And that's a new character. Catalina Island is a channel island off the coast of Los Angeles. It falls under the law enforcement.
Old song by the Four Preps, Santa Catalina, Waiting for Me. Yeah.
22 miles and something.
Across the sea.
Yeah. That's a sheriff's department jurisdiction, and they have one detective on that island. So that's from real life. And so in my novel, I've written a fictional story about that one detective.
I look forward to it. And I always look forward to talking to you, and I thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for spending this time with us. I should thank Book Passage, which provided a room for us. Michael Connelly is the main speaker here today. And thank our great team. In fact, Alex and Colleen are here with me, and of course, Jeff and Chad behind the scenes, and Kevin and Tanya, and Michael Connelly. It's always a privilege.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a privilege for me.
Thank you so much. I'm Michael Krasny.
Bandwidth for Gray Matter is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.